Recording in progress. Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to hand off the mic to co-chair of the Research and Publications Committee, Marilia Antunes.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the ALAO Research and Publications Committee, we are very delighted to introduce you to our colleague, Dr. Bright. We warmly welcome her, and Kawanna, you can take it away, but before we start, if you have any questions, feel free to type your questions on chat, and we will address those questions for the questions section at the end of the presentation. It's all yours, Kawanna. Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Or if you happen to be hiding out in another part of the country, good morning, or wherever you happen to be. I'm actually delighted to be here. I've known Marilia for some time, so it was easy to convince to come let me talk about something I love, which is research, and especially survey design. So I do have slides, of course, to keep me on track and to also make sure I have something visual for you to stare out, not just my face today. So let me share my main screen here. We'll give that a moment to pop over. And someone give me a thumbs up once they're visible. That would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So as Marilia mentioned, I am Dr. Kawanna Bright. I'm currently an associate professor of library science at East Carolina University. If you're wondering why I'm speaking to you today, I actually do have a Ph.D. in research methods and statistics, but I got my MLIS first. So I was a librarian for 12 years. I did a lot of research without knowing what I was doing, did a lot of surveys without knowing what I was doing. And so I'm really happy that there are people interested in learning a little bit more about survey design. And so what I'm going to do today is walk you through a process of one, making sure we understand the distinction between surveying and then survey design. We're going to talk about the principles of survey design, and that's the bulk of what we're going to cover today. I want you to think of it almost like a checklist for you as you're going through the process of creating surveys. And then a few additional things to think about when you're designing surveys, just to make the process a little bit easier for yourself and the people that you're asking to complete your surveys, and a little bit about cognitive interviewing, just to encourage us to properly test out the surveys before we put them out into the world. So our learning outcomes today are to make sure we understand the value of good survey design for library research and evaluation and assessment, that we can recognize and apply the principles of good survey design, and that we understand the practice and use of cognitive interviewing in survey development. So I do start with this conversation about making sure we have a shared understanding about the difference between surveying something and the survey design, because a lot of times this gets conflated, and it can be a little confusing even when you're like reading research studies and someone said we did a survey study or we surveyed something, but they don't use a survey. And that's because the survey research method is not necessarily tied to using a survey to collect data. It is a method of studying relationships between specific variables. So if you're interested in how, the time you start college age-wise impacts how quickly you finish school, that's something you can actually complete a survey study of. You always identify your variables before you get started, so you know what you're looking for. You will usually have a research question and a hypothesis, and if you're really good, you'll have both. And it could be something descriptive, where you're just trying to describe what you see, or something exploratory, where you're trying to figure out what's going on. Now, survey design itself is about creating an instrument to help you collect data because you have a specific need or a specific question you're trying to answer. So your focus is on developing those questions, and the questions are the most important part of your survey. And you can actually utilize a survey that you've created, a data collection instrument, as part of survey research method, but you don't have to. So someone can do a survey research study and actually use interviews or use observation, but it is also possible, of course, to use a survey that you've developed. So you will often hear me talk about this as an instrument or as a questionnaire, because sometimes that distinction makes it easier for people to separate out survey research method and survey design. But we're talking about survey design. We're talking about building an instrument. Now, of course, using surveys, we can use them for just about anything, but we usually want data that's going to help us to determine how impactful something is, how useful a service is. whether or not people were satisfied either with a program or with a project or a service, whether or not people are using our services. Really helpful to generate new ideas as well, especially if you're struggling to figure out what to do next. So you can actually survey people to find out what do we do next. Also, determining user needs. So before you create that fantastic project that you think everyone's going to love, maybe ask them if they actually need it first. Getting a basic understanding of what is. So what is this thing, or what is the thing that someone actually needs? And then the one thing people really love surveys for, but which is actually the hardest part, is trying to understand how people think, how they feel, what they believe, what their values are, how they perceive something, what their intentions are. That's the thing we typically like to use survey instruments for. And I will say it's a little bit harder to do that, but it is possible. Now, before you jump into actually creating your survey, you always want to know, why do I need this survey? What's the purpose? What's the intent? How am I going to use the data that I'm going to collect? Now, you may be interested in what's happened in the past. You might be interested in what's happening right now, or you may be interested in what people do in the future. Or maybe if you're greedy like me, you want all three of those things so you can actually do some comparison. Then you have to decide if you're going to want quantitative data that you can present in terms of counts or descriptive statistics. This many people said yes to this question. This many people said no to that question. Or maybe you're looking for a pattern or a trend, or to see if something changed. Or you might have a hypothesis you want to test. Maybe you want to see if students attending a research session actually helps to improve their grades in a course. That's a hypothesis you can actually test. Qualitative, you might be looking for a theme or a pattern. You might be checking to see what's similar or what's different in how people respond to things. You can actually present counts as well in qualitative, so you can actually go through and count the number of times something was said or something was done. But usually you're looking for textual patterns. And a lot of times, if you want to tell a story, if your entire goal is to tell a story about something, you usually want qualitative data. This is not to say you can't tell a story with quantitative data, but it's a different type of storytelling. So qualitative data from a survey will allow you to tell the story in the words of the people who completed your survey. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about, what do I want from my survey? Now, I mentioned you can do past, present, and future. So I wanted to provide an example here. And I think we're going to share the slides from this presentation. So don't worry about trying to jot all this down. And this recording will also be available. But I wanted to show you how you definitely can ask on one survey about the past, the present, and the future. And just one of the examples I'll do is behavior. I'm not going to read all of these, but you could ask, when you were a freshman, how often did you visit the library? And then you can ask them, how often do you visit the library, as in right now? So you're still coming to the library. And then you can ask them, do you plan to visit the library within the next few months? So you can actually check on someone's behavior, past, present, and future, all in the same survey without having to change anything. Now, I will say, if you're asking about past things, just keep in mind people's memories aren't great. So be prepared for how that affects your data. And then if you're asking about future, keep in mind that what they say and what they do may be two very different things. So what they say and then their actual intent and their actual actions may be different things. So those are just things to keep in mind. Current data, of course, perfect for a survey questionnaire. So with that lead in, we're going to get into the 15 principles of survey design. And this is why I wanted you to see this sort of as a checklist, because you, in essence, can go through this list like a checklist. And so we are going to go through each of these. There are a couple that we're going to sort of breeze over because they're not going to be as useful or as essential. They would also require you to probably complete a couple of research methods classes, and we're not going to do that. But we're going to focus on the ones that help us with the types of surveys that we design. So we have 15 principles here. We're going to focus mostly on about 13 of those. First one is probably the easiest one of all. Back to the intent. What are you hoping to get out of your study, out of your project, out of this survey you're designing? If you're trying to do something that's exploratory, you're probably going to have a shorter survey. It's going to be less detailed. It's going to be more open, and it's probably going to be qualitative in nature. If you're trying to confirm something with your study, trying to show that what you thought is exactly what you're seeing, you want percentages, then it's probably going to be a much more detailed and specific survey. But always spend a little time in the literature. It's very possible someone already did your survey. And it's very possible they've actually shared that survey and don't mind you borrowing it. You will likely need to change it for your purposes a little bit, but no need to actually reinvent the wheel. If it's already out there, if someone's done it in another similar library and they're willing to share their survey, use it as a base for you, and then you're able to move forward from there. Now, principle two is to make sure you understand who your research participants are. You want to try to think like them. And that means you're looking at the questions and you're thinking through, how do I think they'll answer this question? Because that's going to impact the types of questions you ask and the responses that you're actually giving them to choose from. You also want to try to empathize with them. So as much as you may want to ask them 100 questions, they're not going to complete a survey with 100 questions on it. So empathize with the person that you're actually trying to complete your survey and think through, well, how many questions do I honestly think they'll get through? 5, 10, maybe 15. And make sure you're thinking through that process as well as you are getting to the point of creating these items. And that feeds right into principle three, which is trying our best to use natural and familiar language. So you want to use language that is understandable to the people that you're actually trying to get to do your survey, your questionnaire. This means you may need to try to avoid using jargon or technical terms, especially if it's not something that they commonly use in their own language. You do have to think about the age of your participants. You have to think about their educational level. You want to think about cultural characteristics if you know about them, and anything else that might be useful to help understand who they are and how they might interpret what you're putting in front of them. You also want to think about their reading level. So I do a lot of surveys of academic librarians, of faculty members. I'm usually less worried because I typically am talking about people who are degreed or have been in higher education or academia. But if you definitely know you're going to be working, say, with a community member, or you just never know what the status is, even of students coming into our institutions, think about their reading level and what they're going to understand, and make sure it's at a reading level that everyone understands. The baseline is usually an 8th grade reading level. That's what people say if you're working with the general population or if you're unsure of the reading level of the folks you're working with. Now, I do have a couple examples of practice I want you to do with me today because I think it's important you get a little hands-on in these workshops. I'm not saying you have to participate, but this could be a little fun. So for principle three, we do have an actual Padlet that I'm encouraging you to use here. Anyone who wants to do it on an iPad or a phone can use the QR code. Jason's going to put the link into the chat for us, though, so you can definitely go there. But what I want you to try to do is to write a question related to technology use that fits one of the following audience members. So either for undergrad students, for graduate students, or for faculty. And so we're just going to take a couple of minutes to do that. This is one of those quick things. Don't overthink it. Just see if you can pull together a question for one of these student groups, for one of the group's audience members, based on the idea of technology use. And I'm going to switch my share over so we can actually see some of these popping in here. See if Zoom will behave itself and let me do that today. There we go. All right. Okay, so hopefully it is sharing this screen now. I think I've lost you all for a second, but that's okay. So what I'm seeing is, a lot of people choosing undergrads. How often do you use AI for writing assignments? Oh, that is a hot question right now. I love that one. What is your favorite web browser? And we still argue over that. I'm a Chrome user. How many times have you used UDiscover to find resources? Absolutely. How frequently do you visit the library website with the library URL there? Yes. And then one faculty, have you seen students using generative AI, i.e. ChatGPT or Gemini, in your classrooms? And the answer, of course, for most of us there is definitely yes. Been going on quite a bit, even in the library science program as well. All right. So feel free to keep playing with this. I just wanted to do this really quick just to show some of the possibilities here. But I think the real distinction here is you'll notice that Some of these questions could easily cross over. You could easily ask grad students and faculty what their favorite web browser is. You can easily ask a grad student about how often they use AI for writing assignments. And that actually might be a very interesting comparative study for asking both of them to see if you see a distinction between the number of times undergrads or number of times grad students report actually doing their writing assignments using AI. So nicely done, you all. Thank you so much for that. All right, I'm going to switch us back. Oh, actually, we got a grad student one. How often did you visit your undergrad library? I like that. And I'll also say that tells us a little bit about the institution as well, because I did also attend an institution that had an undergrad and a grad library, and now I'm at one that does not. So it's very interesting what you can also find out about an institution from the type of question you can actually ask as well. All right, let me switch back over to my PowerPoint, if it will let me behave itself today. We got this. There we go. We'll switch back to screen 2. We should be back in business now. This is what happens when you have 2 screens and lots of things happening. We got this stuff. All right, so we practiced thinking about our different participants. Now let's also think about making sure we're creating items that are clear, precise, and short. Because if you're writing an item that gets a little bit convoluted, it can get confusing for the person who's actually completing it. And you don't want them to not understand what you're asking them. You don't want them having to sit there and think through, so what are you really trying to get at here? So you want to keep things as short and sweet as possible. Also, try to write your items in a way that all your participants are going to interpret the meaning in the same way. Now, I'm going to say all loosely here, folks, because let's be honest, it's probably not going to be possible to write an item where every single person who reads it is going to interpret it the same way. But you can definitely try to do it where there's about, let's say 80%. 85% of people will interpret it the same way. And then you're going to have a few who just have their own thing going on. That's just the way it works. Also, if you do absolutely have to use a technical term, go ahead and define it. If it's a case where you just can't leave it out, you need that term because it's relevant to your study, just include the definition. Make sure that everyone sees the definition so that they are referring to that definition and understanding what you're asking them in terms of that term. Like one person put in their example the actual URL. You asked about the library website. Don't let them guess because the library might have multiple websites and they might go to certain different websites. So you're asking specifically about this set website. Give them the URL. That way you definitely know they're answering a question based on that and not based on what they might think of as the library website. Sorry, I'm playing with all my different screens. You all can't see that, but I'm having fun over here today. All right, we got this. All right, so here's an example of, let's just say something you should never do. The library's OPAC offers 3 ways for you to search for books. Each method will lead to the same results. Which search method do you most commonly use to search the OPAC? Are you satisfied with that method, yes or no? So I think we can all agree that's probably not the best way to ask a question. We're going to practice this one without the Padlet, though. I want you to feel free just to use the chat. So if I gave you this question, what is one thing you could change to improve this question? And just feel free to throw some things in the chat for us so we can see what some of the ideas are for how we might be able to improve this so that we're not seeing this, I'm going to call it a mess. That's what it is. It's a mess. I will honestly tell you, I've seen questions like this on surveys. That's why I use examples like this. So, perfect. So explain what the OPAC is, acronym and jargon, all in one. Absolutely. Emily, break it into 2 questions. Yes. Ryan, explain the methods explicitly. Oh yeah, dear Lord, no one knows what the OPAC is. I have library students who don't know what an OPAC is, so definitely. No one knows what OPAC is anymore. So perfect. You all are on the ball. This is the easiest question I could give you because provide search examples. Yes, Jared. Nice. See, you all know exactly what you're doing. Leave out the second sentence, but say what the 3 methods are. Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, that's exactly what you need to do, folks. This is basically spell out OPAC. If you're going to use it, spell it out. List or show those search methods. You said both of those things. And create separate questions. You can actually do one for the commonly used search terms and one for the satisfaction if you want to. You don't have to bunch everything into one item. So you're on the ball. This checklist is so easy for you all. It's going to be second nature by the time you start pulling together those surveys. All right, so we're already up to principle 5. So next thing you want to do is avoid leading and loaded questions. So leading or loaded questions tend to bias how people respond, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to push people into a certain area just because that's what you want to hear. Loaded questions in particular tend to contain words that can create either a positive or a negative reaction just from reading the question. And then a leading question, if you're like me and you love law and order, basically it's a question phrased in a way that suggests what the answer should be. And, if you have someone there saying objection, you're leading the witness, that's exactly what these questions can do as well. And so here is your loaded leading question. Don't you agree that faculty should collaborate more with librarians? Now, of course, I know where I think, and of course, I'm going to say yes to that question. I'm already nodding just by reading it, but let's say we need to actually ask this in a different way. So this is your last practice, I promise. I'm not going to make you do any more of these after this one, but let's head back over to a different Padlet and let's take a look at this question and see what we can do to try to fix this so it's no longer loaded or leading. So how do we ask about collaboration between faculty and librarians without trying to lead someone to that actual answer? And I will bounce over as well. I still have way too many screens open. This is good though. All right, we're going to share the other Padlet once I find it. I have two Padlets. There we go. Let's see if I can actually get this Padlet to share. And we'll try screen 1. Oh, actually, Padlet 2. There we go. Now I got it. So let's see how good we are at not leading people to the wrong things. All right. So I see, please describe an ideal collaborative relationship between librarians and faculty. I like that one. Now, I might suggest you remove the word ideal because it might lead them to only describing something that's overly positive. You might want to ask them to describe a collaborative relationship between librarians and faculty. The idealistic aspect will come through. It definitely will. Do you find collaboration with librarians effective? Interesting. Okay. And that one you could consider putting that on a rating scale, which we're going to talk about. So it could be, how effective do you find collaboration? And ask them to rate that on a scale. How many times a semester do you think that faculty should collaborate with librarians? The faculty will say 0. The librarians will say all the time. I like that question though. So I like how we're getting some numerical aspects to this as well. So you all have already started creating questions that are both qualitative in nature and also quantitative in nature. Do you have experience collaborating with the librarian? I like that question. And you can even have a follow-up to that one, asking them about what that experience is like. So I like the way you all think. This is good. All right. And feel free to keep using this if you like the practice idea, if you like throwing things out there. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to start thinking through some of these things. So let's switch back. And as I promised, that was the last one. Everything else is just us going through the last of this checklist. So let me fight with my computer to get me back to my screen here. Apologies why I have so many screens open today. Screen 2, share screen 2, and we're back. All right. So now let's get into what I'm going to start calling the nitty-gritty of all this fun stuff. All right, principle 6, avoiding double-barrel questions. And if you do nothing else when you design surveys, please heed this one. Double-barrel questions are when you combine 2 or more issues into a single item. Your respondent, though, may feel very differently about the 2 items, and they might be really unsure of how to actually answer or rate the question. So if someone asks you, what's your level of agreement? All academic librarians should have faculty status and hold a second master's degree. How are you going to interpret the response? If they say, I agree to that, then you're automatically saying that they agree to both those items. But maybe they agree about the faculty status, but they don't agree about needing that second master's degree. Or maybe they highly agree about the faculty status, but only slightly agree about the second master's degree. So you definitely want to make sure you don't have that floating around so that you're left trying to interpret what they're saying. And also they're not left trying to figure out which side to answer. The question I always test with my students is that I like caviar and I like ice cream. And they always come back and say, are you saying together? I'm like, no, and I don't really like caviar, but how do I answer that question? So for you, you're automatically on the lookout for anytime you see and or in a question. Double check it, make sure it's there as a necessity, and It's possible to have two things that go together naturally, but it's also possible that you might need to split those things into two separate questions. All right, now principle 7 is actually a little bit tougher. You have to also avoid double negatives. And typically this happens by accident. It usually happens if your response to the question leads to the entire sentence construction having two negatives in it. And so if the question includes a negative and then asks for either agreement or disagreement or a yes, no, it may wind up being a double negative for the person, which could be confusing for them. So I could ask you something like, your level of agreement that students should not be allowed to not check out books when they don't have their IDs. And that's actually a triple negative, by the way, folks. I gave you 3. The problem here is that you could probably parse it out if you really think about it, but not everyone's going to parse it out the same way. And there are 3 negatives. So did I negate the negation of the other negative, or is it still there? If you absolutely have to have a negative in a question, just make sure you emphasize it for your participant and make sure there's only one there. Because sometimes you want the negative, sometimes that's important. You just don't want to wind up having it be where they negate their answer by saying no, because they didn't quite understand that the negative meant that they changed the direction of the question. Now, principle 8 is where you start deciding whether you want open-ended or closed-ended questions. Those open-ended questions are going to give your participant the ability to respond using their own words. This is going to give you qualitative data. It can give you some quantitative data. You can ask people to list things and you can actually count some things. But you typically do this if you're doing exploratory research. Those closed-ended questions are going to require your participants to choose from a limited number of options that you're giving them. You've predetermined what those responses are. Those are the only responses they're going to be able to choose from. This is going to give you quantitative data, and it's best if you already know the dimensions of the variable. So you already know that I'm asking questions related to racial identity, and here's the entire list, and I want people to choose from that. You often do this for confirmatory research. So you can use both. You can definitely do a combination, and I usually encourage that on most surveys. You have a couple of open-ended questions, even if it's a quantitative survey, and you might have a couple of closed-ended questions for usually demographics if you're doing a open-ended survey, a qualitative survey, but you definitely want to think through the type of data it's going to give you and also what that does for the amount of time it takes for people to complete your survey. So, possible answers for closed-ended questions. You want to make sure that all your response categories are mutually exclusive. This means no overlap. If I gave you this list and said, which age group do you belong to? Well, right now, there are 2 options for me up here. I belong in the 39 to 49 and the 49 to 59. Which one do I choose? Am I feeling more 39-ish tonight, or am I feeling more 59-ish today? How is my day treating me? You don't want that. You don't want people trying to choose which box to put themselves in. And it also means that you have overlapping categories, which is going to make it harder for you if you're doing comparisons later on. You also want to make sure that your response categories are exhaustive, which means that everyone has a legitimate option to choose from. In this case, I stopped at 69 because apparently there's nobody in who I'm surveying who could possibly be above 69 years old. We know that's probably not true. So not only do you want mutually exclusive, you also want exhaustive. So in this case, under 18, 18 to 24, all the way up to 65 or above, covers everybody, and we don't have any overlap. So just always double check that. Make sure there's nobody who winds up fitting into multiple categories because you don't want that overlap happening. It's going to confuse them. It's also going to mess up your data as well. All right, we're getting there, folks. Principle 10, response categories. Now, I will say this is where we're going to start getting a little bit crazy because there's multiple options, but choosing how you're going to have people rate things is super important. You've got your rating scales that are available to you. These are the choices that your respondents are going to have to be able to choose their response. This is going to give you quantitative data. The 4 most typical are numerical rating scales, rankings, semantic differentials, and checklists. There are many more out there. If you've ever worked with Qualtrics, Qualtrics will give you 20 more options for how you can collect data, but these are the 4 most common ways. So those numerical rating scales are basically just a set of numbers and then anchored points that you actually label. And if you anchor only the endpoints, that's pretty common. So like the image I have here, you've got almost never at the 1, you've got almost always at the 5. If you decide to anchor all of them, that just means you're creating a fully anchored rating scale. And a lot of people like to do that so that people aren't guessing what the in-between items are. If you are anchoring just the end, you typically want an odd number of points. So you wouldn't anchor just the ends if you had 1 and 4. You'd probably go ahead and anchor them all. Those anchors are actually reference points for your respondent. So it's there to help them understand where they feel they might be able to put their opinion or their thought. And the main thing for you is just keeping it balanced. You don't want to anchor a few things here, but not anchor on more on the right side. You just want to make sure that it looks balanced when you're looking at it as well. The other question people ask is how many points should I have? Between 4 and 11 is what you will typically see. 5 and 7, though, are most common. Most of you have probably completed surveys that either had 5 or 7 options for you. You don't usually want fewer than 4 because then your responses are unreliable. People don't have enough room to spread out. But you don't want more than 11 because then people are just confused. Because at that point, where do I put myself? I could be anywhere. You do want to err on the side of more, though, because you can always collapse your categories during data analysis, but you can never add a category after data has been collected. So if I have a 5-point scale that has 2 ranges for disagree and 2 ranges for agree, I can always collapse that down and then have just 1 big category for agree and 1 big for disagree as well. And oftentimes that's necessary for data analysis. The other big question, though, the one that's going to drive you crazy, is whether or not to give people a middle option. The middle category is usually a neutral response. Not always, but usually a neutral response. If you don't give them the middle category, you're forcing them to pick a side. But oftentimes people will default to neutral and not answer your question. So you need to decide whether or not that neutral response is necessary, because if it's not, usually you're better off not giving them a neutral and asking them to pick an option on either side. Now, the rankings are a little bit easier. We basically just ask people to indicate how important something is or what the priority is for something by assigning numbers to it. And we usually say either do this in ascending or descending order. We usually say give it a 1 if it's the most important or most likely, give it a 4 if it's the least important or least likely. You can actually use this with open-ended questions as well. You could ask people to list out their top 5 favorite books and number them 1 to 5. And that's open-ended, but you can still see what the ranking is. But you typically want to avoid asking people to rank a really large number of items. I usually say no more than 5, but you can probably get up to 7. By the time you get above 7, you have people at the bottom of the ranking list who just don't care. They're like, I don't care about those items. So they could be 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10, doesn't matter. That's not going to be useful data for you. So just keep an eye on how many items you're asking them to rank so that it doesn't become onerous for them. Now, the semantic differential is just another technique where you now just have a scale that you're asking people to select from, not quite high to low, but that can actually work as well. It's a bipolar rating scale. Usually it has 6 to 7 points. You can see from the example here, I have a 5-point scale. But it's bipolar because the endpoints are actually anchored by contrasting adjectives. These are just antonyms of each other. Something's valued, something's unvalued. Something's comfortable, something's uncomfortable. This is actually really good if you're just trying to do a ranking of an attitudinal object, how people feel about something, usually how they feel about a person. I used to see these a lot when I was asked to rank my supervisor, whether or not my supervisor made me feel important or valued or unvalued. So that's a common way you'll often see it done. But you can use it for many other things as well. A lot of people like this over the agree disagree because they feel like it actually pushes people in a certain direction. And the numbers don't necessarily indicate, this idea that I strongly disagree or agree, but it does indicate whether or not they place more value on something or less value on something. All right, and finally for this area, checklists, our favorite thing. So this is just where you're like, hey, check all the things that apply. This is going to be useful mostly only for descriptive purposes. Excuse me 1 second. Losing my voice. This just means that you can report how many people checked a box next to an item, but it's going to be really hard for you to do any type of major data analysis here because people are going to be crossing over each other all the time. The general rule is to avoid them if you need to do a high level of analysis and just use a rating scale. Just go ahead and do something like a semantic differential or something else. The other thing is that if you're looking at a checklist and you're doing the all of the above or choose all that apply, think about how you're going to present that information because you will have a hard time grouping people based on it. However, you can do a type of and or type of process. So how many people selected it means that anyone who didn't select it, it goes into the no pile. So you actually can do a little bit of the dichotomy there, but it does give you a little bit more of that process of having to cull the data out if you do it as a select all that apply. All right, now this is one of the ones that we're just going to mention because it's important that you pay attention to this, and you've probably seen these types of scales out there. If you're trying to measure something that's more abstract, something that cannot be seen visually very well, that requires multiple items to be able to rate it, then you actually need to use multiple items to get to that item. So you can't just ask one question. In this case, I pulled the example of work locus of control. It's a scale. There are 16 items on this scale. And after you go through all 16 items, the final score tells you where someone falls in terms of their work locus of control. This is what they call a Likert or summated rating scale. And yes, I did say Likert, not Likert. I actually was taught by the professor who was taught by Dr. Likert, but I'm Southern, so it sounds like I'm saying Likert. I apologize for that. But the point of the scale is that you cannot use a single item to understand something like work locus of control. You have to have multiple items. The advantage of this is that you get more reliable scores and you also allow people to have more variability in their responses. The negative side of this is that creating one of these scales is a whole job in and of itself. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes statistical analysis skills. You probably don't want to dig into that. But it doesn't mean you can't utilize someone else's scale, like the work locus of control scale, in your own research study. There's just another level of analysis you would have to do with your data that could easily be done with the help of a statistician, which most of you probably have access to, hopefully, at your institutions. That's also related to this idea of using multiple methods if you're trying to understand an abstract construct. If you only use one method to measure something, like they could actually lead to this idea of just seeing a correlation between variables because of how you measured it. So this is just a reminder that sometimes you may have to use a scale and then ask another question, probably an open-ended question, to get a little bit more information about it, and then you do some comparison. We're not going to spend a lot of time here. It's just a reminder that if it's an abstract construct, something that's not easily seen with one question, you might have to do a little bit of extra work to be able to get to that construct. Now, back to the useful ones. Principle 13, reverse wording. You do this if you're worried about someone creating what we call a response set. And this is just the tendency for people to respond to a series of items in the same direction, regardless of the question you ask them. I used to do the LibQual surveys, and we would ask undergrads to fill them out. And I don't know if you've ever done them, but we've seen them sit down and just go agree, 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 agree. They're not reading anything. They're creating a response set. So there is one called acquiescence response set, and that's the tendency to say yes or to agree rather than to say no or disagree to a whole series of items, regardless of what the item is asking. There's also the social desirability response set, which is the tendency to try to give an answer that they feel is more socially desirable. We saw a lot of this when we saw surveys going out that were designed to help people understand if they had any concerns with bias or racism. And a lot of people would answer questions in a way that might not have been truthful, but at least made them feel like they were answering the way they thought they should answer based on what society was asking them. So what we do is we use reverse wording, and it's in many ways it's a way to trip them up a little bit. And I don't mean to say that in a mean way, but it means that they have to stop to read the question because this question is worded in the opposite direction. And typically the easiest way to do it is you've got 4 questions that have all been worded positively. Your 5th question is worded negatively. If they answer the same way to that 5th question, they're not reading your questions. What I do as a researcher, if that happens, is I probably toss that entire survey out because it clearly shows me the person was not reading the questions and not taking it seriously. That data is no good to me. You expect to see variability. You expect to see people answering in a way that aligns. And if you don't see that, they probably weren't actually taking the survey seriously. Now, this can actually reduce reliability and validity for a scale if you're doing a multi-item scale. But for you, where you just have questions where you want to make sure people are paying attention, there's nothing wrong with using reverse wording. But you typically only do it if you're concerned about the response sets happening. All right, principle 14 is trying to make sure that things are organized and easy to use. So think about the order of your questions. Put your most important questions first, put your demographic questions last. This is the opposite of what most people do, and the mistake they're making is that sometimes people will get through the demographic questions and then not complete the survey, which means they never got to the question you actually needed them to answer. You can still analyze data without demographic questions. You may not be able to do some of the comparison you wanted to do, or you may not be able to fully describe your participants the way you want to, but you would still have answers to your most important questions if they were first. So put those questions first. You also want to make sure you're beginning with positive, non-threatening items first. Not saying you should have any items that scare anybody, but every once in a while, some questions are a little more difficult. So start with the positive ones first, ease them into the more detailed questions. Then also try to keep that questionnaire at a logical length. I am notoriously bad at this. The first questionnaire you design is a test questionnaire. You're going to cut it down. So the first one, throw the kitchen sink in there. It's perfectly fine. But make sure you're trimming it down before you actually launch your actual survey. If you're doing a paper survey, try to limit the contingency questions. Those are the ones that say, if you answered yes to 3, jump to 7. If you answered no to 3, jump to question 9. That drives people crazy, and they don't usually like doing that. Now, if you're doing it online, let the program work for you. Qualtrics will jump for you. I love being able to use Qualtrics for that. I'll just say if they answered yes, show them the next question on number 9. They don't even know it's happening. It just happens. Make sure you have clear instructions and try to limit the number of questions they see on a page. You don't want people either skipping over or jumping down or getting confused. Don't overly clutter things if possible. And then if you can, make sure you include lead-in statements if you're going to transition to a different topic. So if you started your survey out by talking about having them rate your services, and then you're going to transition over to rating something like programs, make sure you have a lead-in that says, thank you so much for completing that section of the survey. We would now like to ask you some questions about our programs, and then shift over to that. And then as best you can, and in complete opposite of what I've done on this slide, maximize your white space throughout. So try not to have so much on the screen for them or so much on the page for them that they can't quite see what's going on. It just looks too busy, then it's a little bit harder. All right, and you made it to the end. Principle 15, most important thing you're going to do after figuring out what your survey is about and after creating all those questions is to pilot your survey. Make sure you pilot it before you administer it officially. Minimum 5 to 10 people. You can start with your friends, you can start with your colleagues, but try to find some people who are similar to your participant group because that's going to be helpful. Make sure you're also doing what we call the think aloud technique. This is very similar to the cognitive interviewing I'm going to talk about. Have people verbalize their thoughts while they're actually working through the activity. It helps you to hear if something's wrong with the wording or the organization, and then also helps them to help you see that there might be something going on that you don't see because you're too familiar with the items. And then always do a follow-up. Always debrief your testers. Always ask them questions. Have them tell you what they thought about the survey. You often learn some really interesting things from that conversation. All right, just a few more minutes, folks. We're going to have time for questions, I promise. So additional survey design elements. When you're thinking about your survey administration, make sure you're thinking about which method or combination of methods you need to get the most participants. Email, phone, in-person, mail, print, all are viable. Not as cheap in some cases. Email is usually your best option if you're trying to reach a wide group of people, but not everybody's going to respond. In person, people will stand still for a little while. However, keep in mind that you don't want an overly long survey for that. So just think through how you're going to get the most people, or if you can actually administer in multiple ways to make sure people respond and you have enough numbers to work with. You also want to be careful about potential bias in survey design. So surveys are built in a way to help you answer questions. You're going to build bias into your survey no matter what you do. The point is to acknowledge that bias and keep it at a low level. You don't want to inject bias into your questions. So this is why we don't do leading or loaded questions. This is why we try to make sure we have a balance of positive and negative tone questions, and that we're careful about our word choice and using inclusive language. The one that I try to avoid most of all is if you're doing something related to either gender identity or racial identity, if you're still allowed to ask those questions, you don't ever want to have a category that just says other to let people fill in. That means you just othered people. So instead, we usually say things like, how do you prefer to be categorized in this way, and let them tell you, but try not to use the term other. Also acknowledge any assumptions about survey completers you may have. And I told you to get to know them. I told you to empathize with them, but don't stereotype them. There's a fine line there, but you want to be careful about that. And then check your demographics. Check to see who's responded to your survey. Do you notice that you've got too much leaning in one direction? You might need to go out and try to get additional people to complete your survey. And then survey platforms remind you you have lots of options. Qualtrics, if you're in academia, is usually a go-to, and most institutions have it. RedCap is also academic and usually provided by a lot of institutions, especially that have medical schools. Google Forms is always an easy go-to. SurveyMonkey's still out there, and Alchemy is out there as well. I included a link here you all can pull off of the slides where there's a review of other software. So if you're interested in seeing what else is out there, you can definitely take a look. And then those cognitive interviews that I mentioned. So I mentioned the think aloud technique as part of piloting, and this is the same thing as a cognitive interview. What you want to do is try to identify testers who are similar to your desired participants. And again, start with friends, colleagues if you have to, but try to get at least one or two people who are very similar to those who are going to complete your survey. Prepare to record your interview somehow. You're going to need some type of recording, whether it's in person or virtual, and then determine who's going to read the questions, whether it's going to be your interviewer, whether it's going to be the person testing, or if you're going to have a neutral person step in and do that for you. And then as you're doing this interview, usually the best option is to have your tester read aloud and then respond aloud as well. So have them read the question out loud, have them respond out loud. What you're doing is listening for any issues with the wording, with their understanding of the question, or their ability to even answer the question. Then spend some time with that debrief process where you're asking them, were there any questions that you didn't ask on this survey that they really were expecting to see based on what you had told them about the survey? And also, they'll often tell you, well, I think you might want to ask this question as well. These are typically people who are going to have a better ear for what they're expecting to see in a survey related to a topic that you care about, and you want to actually listen to that. But keep in mind, you do not have to take every suggestion given to you. What I'm usually looking for in a cognitive interview are problems. I'm listening to where people can't even answer the question at all because of either how it's worded or because of the options I've given them. Those I want to fix. Other times you're going to have people who are going to give you suggestions that are just based on their personal preference. And if you get it like 3 or 4 people giving you 3 or 4 different suggestions for the same question, your best bet is to stick with your question. It just means that something's going on and they all have a different view of it, but you can't change it for each of them. It also might mean that you want to reconsider that question. Is that question even necessary for what I'm asking if everyone's interpreting that question in a different way? So that process of going through and talking to someone, having them talk through your survey out loud is probably one of the most beneficial things you could ever do to make sure your survey is working the way it's supposed to, and that once you put it into action, it's actually going to collect the data that you want to collect. So with that said, I think I left us 10 minutes for questions, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know I just talked a mile a minute, so hopefully when you get to the video recording, you can slow me down because that's usually the best option for everybody. All right, let me stop share here. Get my mouse over to the other screen. I think I stopped. Are we back?
We are back. That was wonderful. That was so much really good information that like from slide number 1, I was like, okay, I was misunderstanding surveys entirely. So thank you. Thank you from all of us here. Does anybody have any questions? I did not see any in the chat as we were going, and I've maybe got one. I had a couple others that wound up getting resolved over the course of the yeah, okay. So Aurelia is saying that it seems that lead-in statements could be used for longer surveys.
Absolutely. And typically, if you've got a shorter survey, if you're doing like a 5-question survey, you don't usually need a lead-in statement for that. But like I think back to my dissertation survey where I had 3 different distinct sections. I had to have lead-in statements to help people understand that we were shifting gears. I need you to refocus now. Don't think about that previous section. Think about what we're talking about now, especially if there is any type of similarity in how the structure of your responses are made. So even though the questions are very different, you're still asking them to strongly agree, strongly disagree. So they may start thinking, didn't you just ask me this? You're like, no. The first one was asking you about your collection development. This one's asking you about your instruction. So let's make sure we're focused on that. So yes, those lead-ins are perfect for the longer surveys to make sure you keep people moving. Also, you notice when I was giving my example, I had the thank you so much for completing the previous section of the survey. it's kind of that sense to let them know you acknowledge that you're asking a lot of them. Like, this is a long survey. I'm so sorry, but I appreciate that you've come this far. Please don't give up on me now. Push forward. Having stuff like that really helps. A few items I didn't put on the list because there's a little bit of controversy about it is whether or not you should show progress on your survey. So whether or not personally, I like to see it unless it's a longer survey because if I see I'm not even halfway done and I've been there for 10 minutes, I'm not completing that survey. Um, but a lot of times people want to know how far into this am I going? How much further do I have to go? So a progress bar is actually really nice as well. And then the other one is whether or not to include a back button if you're doing it online. Can they go back? I actually like to have a back button because you never know when someone's going to realize they answered a question the wrong way. They're gonna be like, oh, I didn't mean that. Especially if you do have questions where I build a lot of surveys where how you answered question 6 affects how you see question 8, like the responses you have access to. Someone may realize they clicked on something and say, oh, I didn't mean that. Oh, hang on. I can't answer these questions. Let them go back so they can actually correct it and then come back forward. So those are probably the other two things I really suggest, especially for surveys that you consider, but that aren't necessarily things you have to do, but just think through how it might impact people's ability to complete that. Oh, recommend adding numbers to the questions. Ooh, that's always an interesting one as well. So in Qualtrics, I will add numbers to the questions that do not align with how Qualtrics has the numbers because I probably move questions around in my survey. So it's actually helpful for me to know which one was really one and not what Qualtrics has, which by the time I get there is question 27. So 27 might be question 1, and I'm like, I don't know what question that is. So I like doing it so that it shows up and I know when I'm doing my data analysis. Longer surveys, I like numbers. I do. I do. Shorter surveys, I don't usually bother because there's 4 questions. People are going to complete them. They don't worry about it too much. So, oh yeah, Jared, absolutely. That back button is the one thing for some reason, Qualtrics doesn't automatically enable it. And it drives me crazy because I forget it every time and I have to go enable my back button. And it's always someone in my cognitive interview who points it out, who says I couldn't go back. And I'm like, oh, we got to go back. So it's always nice to see that. Oh, strategies for participating in surveys. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. Most students will work for food. Let's just be honest, they will work for food. So when we used to do the LibQual, it was surprisingly low amount of food they'd work for. Cookies and punch. It's like they wanted to go back to kindergarten. It was so cute. So cookies and punch. But most of us know we can't afford gift cards. We can't. So gift cards are always a good draw for anyone. So small amount. People will actually be okay with just being in a drawing as well. Like there doesn't have to be a guaranteed gift card. They will actually feel free to jump in and be like, oh yeah, I might win something. That's great. But low level is always like food and snacks, especially on the college campus. They will happily take food and snacks. But if you can get gift cards, anything that might, even like local places that might give you free food coupons or something like that. I used to send out calls every year and be like, can you just send me a few? And they send me like 5 or 6 free sandwich, free drink, free smoothie. Students love that stuff too. So if you're talking about the undergrads, especially, grad students want money. I'm just going to be honest with you, grades. They're broke. They're struggling. So gift cards for them are almost always the ideal way to go. But they will also sometimes work for food if it's real food. Like they'll work for like a full meal. They won't usually work for a snack, but they'll work for full meals. But it's almost always going to be ways to get them to show that you're giving them an incentive. The other thing is to try to build it into, if you can, build it into a class. So I used to always sometimes ask a faculty member if they could give extra credit if the students would complete my survey. And most times they would be happy to do that. A few points here and there, and students were like, okay, I'll take extra credit. So for all of these, I will kind of put out the reminder though that the quality of your data can be impacted by your incentive. Which means you don't want to over incentivize. If you give too much, it's people they feel like they have to finish the survey, but they don't really understand what they're doing. They just have to do something. So it's really a fine line of how much incentive to offer. And it's why small amounts of food tend to work because people are usually just coming through, going back. Quick snacks are great, and they don't mind doing a short survey. if you're doing a longer survey, do try to give out a gift card or have a drawing or something because people are going to spend 20, 30 minutes on your survey. They will be more likely to finish that survey and give you good data and good feedback if you can offer something. But I know money is always an issue, and I acknowledge that as well.
Really fantastic insight. Thank you for that response. I think we have time for one more question if anybody else has one. A
Usually the
second in
question
the
people
chat.
ask is like, how do I get an expert to review my survey? That's usually the
Yeah,
question someone will ask.
sure.
You send it to me because I'm nosy and I will do it for free. I am not kidding. I love surveys. I love reviewing surveys. If you're looking for a survey expert to just give you some quick feedback on the overall structure, the questions, everything like that, honestly, just send it to me. No questions asked. Just let me know when you need it back is the main thing.
That's
So
wonderful.
yeah.
What a great resource.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
Really.
love surveys. I also want to see good surveys out there, folks. You will never know how much I cry if I'm reviewing someone's paper for they submitted for a manuscript and I'm looking at their survey going, why? Why did you do this to me? Why? Why did you do this to yourself? So if I can help you
That's
to get
relatable.
better data, yes, absolutely. Just never hesitate. I don't mind at all. It's very useful. If anyone ever wants me to have my class do it, always hit me up in the spring semester because that's
Sure.
the big class. I will put them to work.
Love it. What an unexpected surprise right there at the end. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I wanted to thank Dr. Bright. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us for the ALAO Spring Research Publications Committee webinar. Thanks to Marilia Antunes, co-chair of the committee. This was a wonderful, wonderful session. I'm excited to come back to it again and again. Like you said, maybe at like half speed to make sure that I can truly digest everything that is part of it. We will be distributing the PowerPoint to registrants, and we'll have that video up on the ALAO YouTube page before too long. I wanted to thank everybody so much for joining and participating in the Padlets. This was really, really a great experience, and I feel like everyone is walking away with a lot more knowledge about survey design than we came in with. So thank you again.
Yeah.
And yep, folks in the chat are also doing that. We'll
I
stop that
appreciate you all
recording.
so much.
Thank you.